Now we're going to talk about stakeholders. In here, we can see that it says a stakeholder is any individual, group, or organization that can be affected by, or perceived itself to be affected by the project. So a stakeholder can be essentially, see the project as a threat or enhancement to their position. They can become active supporter or blocker of the project or its progress. They can support or oppose the project. They can gain or lose. You can gain or lose as a result of the project delivery. So when starting a project, it is important to understand who your stakeholders are. So let's break that down a little bit. So as it states here, any individual, group, or organization that can affect your project is a stakeholder. So if there's a, let's say, for example, a work going on in your house, let's say you're doing a kitchen, those working on it are stakeholders. Those you yourself who's going to be affected by being moved into several places, not being able to use your kitchen, is also a stakeholders because you're affected by it. You also need to understand those who will be affected by the project's product, those who will use the product at the end, or who will be impacted by that new product going live later on. I've forgotten the name of this small organizations. During the Industrial Revolution in the UK, this people went around breaking down, I think they're called the Luddites. Yes, they're the Luddites. The Luddites went out, basically breaking all the machineries because they threatened, because the machinery threatened their output as people who would sew because the machinery obviously was cheaper and could do a lot more work than them. So essentially, when we're dealing with stakeholders, it's often important to be able to identify the stakeholders themselves. So you start by going, okay, who are my list of stakeholders? Once you've gathered your list of stakeholders, try to determine where they are. So you could do kind of basically this sort of analysis. So you could determine whether or not they are blockers, detractors, supporters, champion, and in the middle, you have your neutral. That's neutral. You get it. So essentially, let me explain what these are. Your blockers, I'm going to use the term B, are anybody who basically hate your project with a passion. They despise every aspect of it, despise it. They think this is the worst thing that could ever happen. They are working actively to stop it, not passively, actively. They want this thing to end, and they will go to any lengths to make sure it doesn't succeed. Your detractors are basically the sidekick of your blockers. I'm going to use D. Basically, they don't like your project. They think it's a bad idea, but they're passive about it. So whereas blockers are active about trying to stop it, they are passive about it. They're hoping that either you will see the light or somebody else will stop it. So they're not willing to protest or cause any ruckus on the basis of it. Then you have your supporters. Your supporters are basically people who think this is a terrible idea. Supporters are people who think this is a good idea. But they're also passive about their support. So they won't help you out, but they wish you all the best. They hope it comes through, but they're not really trying to make it work. And then you have your champions. You see, your champions love your project, and they are actively trying to make sure that it succeeds. Then, of course, you have the people in the middle, which are neutral. These are people who should care. At least that's the way I look at them. They should care, but they don't. I almost look at this as people who usually, during a general election, everybody should care who the prime minister is going to be. Those who choose not to vote are neutral. They're like, I'm happy with either way. If, this guy comes in, if he doesn't, but they're neutral about it. So essentially, the neutrals are not really the people you're targeting. The purpose of doing this is to try and figure out where your stakeholders are. And then, of course, you could do a power interest analysis on the basis of that. So someone with low power, I'm going to use P for that, and low interests. So if a stakeholder is low power, low interest, you could just monitor them. They don't really need to, you don't need to do much about that because, frankly speaking, in terms of power, they can't affect the outcome of your project. They're too low in power. They can complain, but nobody is really listening. And in terms of interest, they don't really actually care about the outcome. So you just need to monitor them to make sure that they don't change per se, that the power doesn't go up or their interest doesn't go up. So if you have somebody that is low on power, so low on power, but high in interest. So such a person, even though they have very low power, there's a reason why they need to be kept informed in what is going on. So for such a person, basically you need to keep them informed because maybe their job requires it. Maybe you need some resources from them. So keep them informed. And by doing so, they should be happy. If you have somebody who's got high power, but they've got low interests, such a person, you should make sure you keep satisfied. Because they do have a power to disrupt your project, should they wish to, but they just don't care enough about it. And you have somebody who has high power and high interests. Such a person, you should definitely closely engage. Because if that person is, for example, a blocker, you are going to have a very difficult time of it. So the aim, if such a person is a blocker, your intention will be to move them from a blocker to a detractor to a supporter and hopefully to a champion as soon as possible. So essentially, this is part of the reason why we do a stakeholder analysis. We're going to talk about that in more details when we get to the practitioner, but that should give you a general overview of stakeholder analysis.